Hello, I'm Robert McMullen, MD. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm going to talk about holistic treatment of depression. I went to Georgetown Medical School and then did my residency at Columbia, and for over 30 years I've been specializing in psychopharmacology, and the last 9 years also using TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. But I've always been very interested in various holistic, non-medication interventions for depression. And all of these have been proven to work, and some are nutritional. One thing I want to suggest is that we think of what we have been, what our genes are. And for 2 or 3 million years, humans were hairless apes that lived in bands, that were hunter-gatherers. And this has been studied a lot with the hunter-gatherers that still exist. They went around in bands of 20 to 50, and sometimes at particular times of the year when the salmon were running or something like that, more would gather, like 150. One good book on this is on the Hadza, H-A-D-Z-A, in Tanzania that have been studied for some 100 years by many sociologists. And it is a representative group. I've also been reading a textbook on hunter-gatherers. How they live is that they are together all the time. They help each other out. Their relatives or their distant relatives, often they've married somebody from a different group, but the same general tribe and the same language. They hunt, the men, and work at it 2, 3, 4 hours per day. And the women do about the same with foraging for food, mainly digging up tubers from the liana vine. And they're big tubers. It's like a giant carrot. And it's nutritious, and it makes up over 50% of their food. And they get a few other vegetables and berries, and baobab, and they get honey from bees, and so on. They get a wide variety of food. They are together all the time. There's never a time that they're not with other people, except occasionally a man will stay up all night at a water hole, hoping to kill an animal early in the morning when he comes to drink. And they now have arrows that are poisoned, which has only been a few generations. So probably prior to that, they were mainly scavenging, coming across leopards or hyenas that had killed something and then scaring them off. And often they can scare them off because humans are taller, and so animals are afraid of them. There was 3 women that were out foraging for food, and they came across a leopard that had just killed an antelope. And these 3 women had digging sticks about this long, and they went up and intimidated the leopard to run away. And then they took the antelope. Now the leopard could have easily killed them, but he didn't know. You know, they're tall, they were big, and they look straight ahead, just like predators look straight ahead. And then the prey, like deer, the eyes are looking to the side so they can see things. But our eyes go straight ahead, so we look like a predator, and we're tall. So that might have been a little bit stressful, you know, that particular incident. But these people do not have much stress in their lives. Something like that happens as a stress. You come across a poisonous snake and you're stressed out for a little bit and you get away. If a couple of guys are walking out in the wild and they hear a lion roar just on the other side of the trees, that might be a little stressful, though they've got spears and they can just face the lion and he's not likely to attack. So stressful events happen every few days, not that often. Whereas with us, stress happens all day long. If you're in an office and you got a phone call here and a phone call there, each phone call is a stressor, depending on your work. And if you're doing many other jobs, you make a little mistake, then you're upset about that. And then almost all of us have bosses. So that's a stressor, because humans never had bosses. These hunter-gatherers do not have a chief. They make decisions together. Maybe they respect a couple of the older people, but if they decide to move after 3 months to a different campsite, it's a group decision. Some may want to do it, but they talk, and eventually, when most people agree, then they move. If somebody is bossy, so he's sort of like a boss and he tries to get bossy, the people that don't like it just leave. They leave and they start their own band, or they go join another band that speaks the same language. So in none of these groups do they have leaders, except the Northeast American Indians, but they have a steady supply of food from fish. So they hunt fish and they gather, but there's so much food there that they've settled in places and they have a hierarchy and they've got enough supplies of food that some people can be a specialist in making totems. Now, another thing is their diet. They have a lot of omega-3s. There's two types of fats, generally, omega-3s and omega-6s. And our diet is overwhelmed with corn oil, which is an omega-6. Italian bread gets hard in a day or two, but other breads do not, because they put corn oil in them to keep them moist. And just about every food that we buy, if you look on the can, it's got corn oil in it. So we've got, maybe 20 times as much corn oil in our system as the omega-3s. And when they hunted, they ate lean meat, but also there's an equal amount at least of omega-3s and omega-6s in the animal, maybe more omega-3s. The brain of these animals is made up exactly of ours, with a lot of omega-3s, EPA and DHA. And if you kill an antelope, you're not going to throw the brain to the dogs. It's calories, so they'll eat it. They eat everything. Another thing is exercise. They exercise 3 or 4 days a week, going out gathering or hunting. Now, they live better than us because they don't work 8 hours, and somebody called them the first affluent society. When people began to farm 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, suddenly the size of humans went down. The ones that were hunter-gatherers 200 years before, their skeletons are much more robust and bigger. When we started to farm, then most of our diet was rice or wheat or whatever, or maize. And we were not getting a varied diet, so people weren't as healthy. And also, since everybody lived in villages and so on in one place, leaders started taking over, and then they started taxing people. So up until recently, the people who were peasants in England or Russia or anywhere in Europe and China, they were very poor. And the landlords who said they owned the land, they were very wealthy. But that's not the way we used to be. Anyway, so with the exercise, and also a little hard to get all the food they wanted, the hunter-gatherers are also a more normal weight than us. nobody in a hunter-gatherer group is overweight. Another thing is they have a good vitamin D level. During all these times, and as I said, you know, if we've been around 3 hours or so, we've only been farmers for 1 second, so our genes are really that of a hunter-gatherer. So for millions of years, we were an upright primate with no hair. And we don't have hair because we sweat, and therefore we can run or walk long distances and keep cool, not overheat. And having all of this exposed skin allowed us to make a large amount of vitamin D, and our body is designed to have a lot of this hormone. It's actually a hormone that was misnamed in 1922. And they say that humans were in Europe for 60,000 years. So that means for 50,000 years before farming, we were hunter-gatherers, going in bands. Now, what did they wear? There was no cotton, no wool. So the choice was leather or weave something from plants, neither of which sounds that comfortable in the summer. So humans probably wore close to nothing, maybe something to cover the genitals or something. And being that exposed, usually the vitamin D level is 70 to 80, and some of us think 70 is about optimal. If your level is not 30, then you're not absorbing the calcium you should have, and it's not until you are up above 50 or so that the vitamin D begins to reduce your risk of cancer and other autoimmune disorders. Let me show you the distribution of cancer in the, can you put this, of cancer. This is breast cancer in the United States. And where it's dark red is double the breast cancer rate where it's dark blue. The reason it's in the Northeast is all the factories that produce pollution, the pollution blows to the east and blocks the ultraviolet light. And they've measured the ultraviolet light, and sure enough, it's lower up here in the Northeast. Now, the breast cancer rate might be a lot higher in Seattle because it's a city and because it rains all the time. I got very interested in this because a close friend of mine who was a dark-skinned black had an enormously low vitamin D of 4, and he developed colon cancer, and it spread and he died. And then the breast cancer rate is rather high along the coast of California. Maybe that's because of all the rich people being very careful and using suntan lotion so they won't get wrinkles. And then the east coast of Florida is significantly higher than further in, and that may be because of all the northerners and older northerners that move down there and stay in the air conditioning. The Maasai, I was surprised that they have a level of 45 when a lifeguard will have a level of 80. This is really below what they should have. But they all dress now in these colorful blankets. I saw them when I was there, and I have 4 of these. And it keeps the heat off, and it's attractive and helps with the tourist. This is somebody from 100 years ago, a Maasai. Now, he does have some cotton around here to cut down on the heat of the sun, but he still has a lot more exposed. These are a couple of Maasai who, let's see if this gets bigger, that posing with some shields and spears. And they're not wearing anything. They have some ropes around for decoration. This guy does. This guy doesn't. And so when you're exposed like that, you can make 10,000, 15,000 units a day. And a lot of doctors get upset if anybody's taking over 3,000 a day. But somebody that weighs 100 pounds should take about 4,000. Somebody who weighs 200 should take about 8,000. That's just the way it is. And alternate tab. This is vitamin D levels around the world, and it's very high in North America. It's lower in the South, where there's much less cancers. These are cancers, or no, these are just vitamin D levels. It's very low in Russia. Now, it's really high in parts of Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, where people are still outside all the time. One more slide. And this is cancer in the whole world. And where it's dark purple here, there's about 10 times as much cancer as where it's light brown. And again, the light brown is in parts of Africa and India where people are still working outside and nobody's a cab driver and nobody's working in a restaurant or a business. And real quick, these are people that have almost zero vitamin D, and then they gave some of them 25,000, and their levels came up to about 50, and then came down. And then these people got 10,000 units in one dose, and these people got a minimal erythemal dose, which means they were exposed. I don't know whether it was in a sunbed or ultraviolet light bed or outside, until they were just getting barely reddish, but not at the point that it was going to be a sunburn. And then their levels went up to above 20, just the one dose, and it stayed there for quite a while. For some reason, it stayed longer than the others. I'm not sure why. But people get very excited if you give 10,000. They think that's way too much, but I often give people on the first appointment 600,000 because there was a study where if you give that much, then 2 or 3 days later, their level is 70 instead of 15. Anyway, it's important, and especially because it reduces the risk of all these other illnesses. Now, some behavioral things you can do is act as if you're not depressed and force yourself to go to social things and parties, and then you're forced to smile and act normal. Even if it doesn't help you, it's not going to make you worse, and sometimes it makes you better. And whatever you do externally has a internal effect. There's a number of examples of this, but one is if you paralyze with Botox, the frown muscles up here, people become significantly less depressed. And this was a double-blind study where the plastic surgeon and the patient didn't know who was getting what. And then when they interviewed them later about this, how much depression they had, they put a cap so the interviewer couldn't unconsciously notice their frown muscles. And then you start thinking negative thoughts, negative scenarios. Just stop yourself. You know, when you're depressed, you start thinking, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, nobody likes me. You say all these negative things to yourself, but it's like a prosecutor and there's no defense. If you had a prosecutor and then the defense stands up and says, Judge, I don't have anything to say, then you're going to lose. And we lose when we're depressed. It makes us worse to think these negative things. So if you can get off of it, think about other things, distract yourself, watch Game of Thrones, do anything you can. And try to walk outside early in the morning. And the best is before you usually wake up in the bright light and have the bright light up. And then exercise daily if possible. 5 hours per week. That's 5 days a week, an hour each. Works as well as Prozac for depression. There's double-blind studies on this. And, or actually the control group came at the same time to the same gym, but they were in a room where they were taught yoga. But it's the people that had a trainer standing over them and telling them do this and do that. Those are the ones who got out of depression. And then reframe the way you view things. If you are taking some exam or it's a professional exam and you fail it twice, and then the third time you get a 72 or something and you passed. Now, you could say, I'm so embarrassed and humiliated. If anybody knew what my grade was, they would know I'm as stupid as I always thought I was. And additionally, I'm a worthless human being because I couldn't get myself to study for the first two exams. We have to change that around and say, I have to accept myself. At least I've passed it and I can go on. And I really can't blame myself for the studying for the first two exams because I was depressed and unhappy. I just couldn't get myself to do it. But if I have to do it again, I'll find a way. But we accept flaws in other people, and we need to accept the flaws in us. And, about those omega-3s, the way you deal with that is you take fish oil pills. I usually take 6 to 10. A guy named Andrew Stoll in 1999 published a study where it just had a fantastic benefit for preventing recurrent depressions. The way I estimated is he must have given people about 18 pills by the amount that he said they received. I should write him a letter and find out. The first person I gave it to, one of the first, is still on 18 pills 20 years later, and every time we reduce them to 10, he immediately becomes mildly depressed. And he remits when we restart it. So we don't try it anymore. I usually tell people to take 10 a day, at least 6, but maybe I should be making people take 18. It's only 1 gram with each pill. And so 30 grams, 30 pills, would just be an ounce. It's not as much as it looks. You can get Omega Via is one brand that has 500 milligrams of the EPA. The EPA fat is the only fat that helps depression, like Environmental Protection Agency. And so it's a smaller capsule, and it's got more EPA than big capsules. And there may be an EPA, one that has 1,000 milligrams EPA. Now, I'm not sure. And then just try to cultivate positive emotions. Think about being joyful, gratitude, interest in other things. Try to feel contentment, hope, pride, amusement. Joke a bit with people and do positive things like that. I think reading literature is good too. Now a rule from AA is called the Serenity Prayer. Accept the things we cannot change, have the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And AA works so well for people, and even people that have really messed up their lives with divorce and financial problems and everything else, as they begin to forgive themselves and to go on. Folic acid, 1 or 2 milligrams a day, has helped depression in women. And maybe it doesn't in men because of it's just not enough dose. The better form of folate is L-methylfolate, which used to be, the brand name was Deplin, and 15 milligrams a day significantly helps depression. Half of that does not work. it's much more likely to work if you are positive for 2 copies of a particular gene when you do the MTHFR gene test. MTHFR gene test is something you should do because about 1 out of 5 people have a, quote, abnormality there, and that predicts that this particular vitamin will help. And we obtain it wholesale for about $22 per month. Now, one problem about vitamins is multivitamins reduce the risk of cancer a little, but if you get a cancer, it is much more aggressive. And they did a huge study of just seeing, what people took and how aggressive their cancers were. Apparently, this is because cancers need folate and B12 to grow fast. And the multivitamin is providing them that. So you really should avoid a multivitamin. You should also avoid a B complex because it's got folic acid and B12 in it. You can take another vitamin if you just, if you could take B12 or folate, but just take one. Especially with B12 if it's low, which it frequently is. And then there's something called NAC, it's N-acetylcysteine. And taking 4 grams per day helps depression. Michael Burke in Australia did a couple of studies about 12 years ago, I think, where he gave them 2 grams and they got better. And one group was schizophrenics and they got better very quickly. But what helped them, what happened was their depression went away. And then some people with cycling depression, maybe they were bipolar 2 or something, it took 4.5 months before it really worked. So I figured the dose was too low, and I gave people 4 and sent about 6 cases to him, and he said I had to be right because not a single one of their cases did as well as my 6. And a couple of years later, they did a study of 2 versus 4, and 4 definitely worked better. Now, who knows? Maybe we could take a lot more. There's theoretically a small chance of kidney stones, especially if you took a very high dose. Inositol is another thing that works. I haven't had great success, but I have had some. But I haven't been using it as much. And you take about 20 grams a day, which might be 3 teaspoons twice a day or something. But it's a sugar found in some fruit, and our brain makes it, and it's a transmitter within neurons. It's part of a cascade, and it's a positive cascade, so somebody got the bright idea. We just give people a lot, maybe it'll get into the brain, and maybe it'll help. That's a nice theory. It almost never works, but this time it did. It does help. And it helps OCD, but it doesn't seem to help it if somebody's on medicine. Now, SAMe is another thing. This is also found in our body, SAM-E, about 400 milligrams twice a day. And B12 helps about 500 micrograms, one over-the-counter pill. But it helps mainly if you are deficient, below 400 or so. And vegetarians commonly are deficient because a lot of it we obtain from meat. Zinc, 25 milligrams. There was a double-blind study in Poland in 2003 that showed it worked, but I haven't used it. Magnesium, 400 milligrams twice a day. A husband and wife named Eby, E-B-Y, have a very good theory that often we are low in magnesium because magnesium is mostly in the cells, so what you measure in the bloodstream doesn't necessarily reflect what's in the cell. And our modern diet has much less magnesium than it used to have. I've used it in quite a few people, and I never had an obvious benefit, but they did have significant benefit with some people. Sarcosine, Sarcosine, 1,000 milligrams twice a day. It's hard to obtain and it's expensive. And I had one huge, enormous success with it. Someone who had a very agitated depression and severe OCD. Oh, another thing is sound. I only found out this, 6 months ago, but there's studies showing that sound helps depression. And that makes sense, because we always had sound around us. We had children outside playing, we had babies crying, we had women pounding food, we had men hitting stones to make arrows and tools, and people talking. We were never in silence. And now we go and live in an apartment by ourselves. It's completely abnormal. Nobody's lived by themselves and, until recent decades. And then if you live in an apartment by yourself, you're not only not socializing with other people and you're not getting any emotional support, but you're also in complete silence unless you keep the TV on and and music on. And this you should do, it should always be on. With light, light helps depression, especially those people that have a winter depression or who have a depression where they sleep too much and it's hard to get up in the morning, because that's sort of a winter depression. The best thing is to buy a really bright light and have it a foot away from you. And I've been trying to get people to do this since 1980, and I've been pretty unsuccessful. You just cannot induce people to get up half an hour or an hour before they usually get up, because they have hypersomnia. It's hard to get up, and they have to get to work, and they always get up late. And a better way of using light is to have a dawn simulator. You can buy this at a website, www.cet.org. cet.org. But you can also just get a timer from the hardware store and get as bright a light as you can, as close as you can above you when you're sleeping, and then have the timer go off a half an hour or an hour before you wake up. And even if you pull away and you put the sheet over, it has a big impact on you, that sudden light. And then you can slowly try to look towards it, and it'll help you wake up, and it'll help depression. And it frequently will work in less than a week. So, and you should keep a very regular sleep schedule, and try not to sleep more than 8 hours, because when you're sleeping 12 hours, it's your depression making you do it. You don't have to sleep that much. And maybe it's an old evolutionary way of being somewhat in a state of hibernation, because you could walk across England before 1500 and you would see no people. There was nobody, because everybody was in huts, and they brought in the animals, the sheep, the chickens, because otherwise the wolves might get them. So they were all in this hut, and then they would sleep with a huge mattress over them. And going outside and doing something was just wasting calories, and there's nothing you could do. Try not to take naps. If you have to take one, absolutely keep it less than 1.5 hours. Now, a way of dealing with winter depression that's a little difficult is don't sleep at all every other night for 3 nights. And then change your sleep time. Try to go to sleep at, say, 9 o'clock and get up at 6 or something like that. And that has sometimes caused a persistent lift in the depression, at least for a few months. Avoid alcohol, and avoid substances that cause more depression. Cigarettes, marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, they all cause more depression. Cigarettes don't do it right away, but there's studies showing that people who smoke cigarettes have more severe depressions over time and also more anxiety. Now, the best diet for depression is a vegan diet or a Mediterranean diet, that no animal products. And all of this is to reduce inflammation. A lot of these things reduce inflammation, and depression is often an inflammatory disease. There's too much inflammation. When you have too much weight and you're a little fat, the fat cells are making irritating pro-inflammatory chemicals that when they hit the brain, they make you more depressed. So people who lose a lot of weight, their depression becomes better, and it's not just because they feel good about their appearance. Now, you have no animal products, and although fish is really good, and you avoid 5 evil white things: sugar, pasta, rice, bread, and white potatoes. And the animal products and these carbohydrates that turn into sugar all increase inflammation in the body. There was a study showing that the Mediterranean diet definitely reduced depression, and then that's vegetables, fruit and nuts, cereal, legumes, fish, and the bad things were the things I just mentioned. Another study was using a similar diet, and this was given to over 10,000 university graduates in Spain who they followed up for 4.25 years. And the ones who followed the diet really strictly, they had a 51% decrease in the risk of depression. And then the ones less strictly, they had a 34% decrease. And the ones who only slightly followed the diet, they had a 26% decrease in the risk of depression compared to people not on the diet. Extra virgin olive oil apparently is better both for heart attacks and probably for inflammation. Now, for elderly, and then I'll finish. For elderly, to have more resilience and more of a sense of well-being and less depression, the following things really help. The volunteering, where they're helping people and they're socializing more and they're around, helps. And concentrating on positive emotions, just working at doing that. Regular exercise, and high religiousness and spirituality. Now, maybe that's connected to feeling connected to something higher and to more people. One reason, I think, is because of the sense of community. I grew up in Bad Axe, Michigan, and we went to the Methodist church once a week, and everybody knew each other in the church, most of them. And then when there was a wedding or something, or had been a funeral, then downstairs there would be a supper, and then certain women would be hired to do it all, and they were women we knew. And the town was also small, 3,000 to 5,000, depending on how you count. So you just knew a huge number of people, and there was just this sense of community. I think especially when you're connected to a church. And now people are moving away from that. And then doing some sort of stress reduction, and then maintaining family and social relations. That's, that's what you need to do. It's the same thing as hunter-gatherers always had. But these are important. And then there's a few electrical interventions like running a little electricity through the brain, TDCS, but all of these are a little difficult to do. Oh, one is negative ions. When water's splashing or lightning is going on, they're making negative ions. And when a hot wind comes through, like through Israel and the North Africa, or the Föhn, F-O with an umlaut, HN, sweeps over Switzerland, it causes people to become depressed and agitated. And if you kill someone when you're in Switzerland, you can use the Föhn as a mitigating factor for why you did it. And that is full of positive ions. So the idea is you give negative ions, and that helps. And it works. You know, there's studies that show that it works. The atmosphere inside a building is almost all positive ions. For some reason, negative ions don't get in. Outside, it's more equal. So a negative ion producer is one of those machines that is an air cleaner, but you need an extra powerful one to have enough coming towards you, and you have to be about a yard away. But it's certainly something that's painless and probably harmless that you could use, and you could obtain the best one from this cet.org. I think I've covered most of it, and TMS, TMS, you know, actually TMS is sort of non-invasive, transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's a very powerful magnet on the same principle as an MRI. And when this powerful electricity goes on, it creates a magnetic field that goes 2 or 3 centimeters in. The Brainsway machine, which is from Jerusalem, goes a little deeper, 6 or 7 centimeters. And by inhibiting or exciting certain areas, this helps depression. It needs 30, 40 treatments usually to get people to normal. With 30 treatments, a third of people come to normal, a third have no benefit, and a third are getting better. And if you keep going, you'll get many of those all the way. And the benefit is often long-lasting. When the person relapses, whether it's a month later or 3 years later, they just need 5 or 6 treatments and they're back to normal. It's really quite an amazing thing, and it's probably interrupting a loop in the brain. This is the cingulate gyrus, and this, you know, the gyruses of thinking and everything are above that, but this is a second layer. And then there's another layer, it's called the insula, and it's under here. And these 2 areas are quite dysfunctional in depression, and they're part of a salience network. It's called a salience network, which responds to problems, moral problems, or suddenly you got a big problem at work. This system kicks in to decide what to do. It's always dysfunctional, and somehow the TMS seems to be correcting this loop. It sort of interrupts the loop, and Harold Sackheim said that we're barely intervening with these magnets because the EEG is different for only 45 minutes after it. And he said the depression is curing itself, and somehow the TMS is enabling that, which made complete sense to me because at that time we had just had, you know, 3 or 4 people that went over 3 years without relapsing. And then when they relapsed, they just needed a few treatments. You know, it doesn't make sense unless you think of it as the brain wants to get better. You interrupt the circuit, and then it reestablishes it, but in a normal way, something like that. So anyway, in summary, ways of treating without medication are the TMS, the transcranial magnetic stimulation, and a number of changes in the way you think, a major effort to socialize more and have more people and be constantly surrounded with people and sound, and certain nutrients and a better diet which is low in carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are just long chains of sugar. In medical school they said, if you eat a big bowl of pasta, you might as well just swallow a cup of sugar, because they break down into sugar as soon as they are eaten. Now, and more exercise, and I think that covers it. So, thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
I left out one or two things. The main one is probiotics. And we used to have a very diverse bacteria in our gut, and now we don't. And in fact, this guy that was describing these hunter-gatherers said that, after they had blood all over their hands cutting up an antelope, one guy took out the messy grass inside the stomach of the antelope and cleaned his hand off. So then he's getting all the bacteria that's in that gut. And then when they were eating, they cut up the colon, and they didn't wash out the colon. I mean, there wasn't any feces obvious, but they didn't wash it out. And then they cut it in strips. And then they threw it on the fire and singed it a little, and then they ate. But they didn't cook it thoroughly. It didn't kill all the bacteria. So they're getting the bacteria from the gut. And we used to get some bacteria from fermenting fruit and also from stagnant water were two main places we got good bacteria. And the bacteriologists call this our old friends because they were much better for our health. Now, if you get a probiotic, you're getting good bacteria, and it's hopefully pushing out some of the bad bacteria. The probiotics that are found in the pharmacy or someplace else on a shelf, half of them have nothing active in them. So you really should get 4 or 5 brands and put them all in a bowl and then put it in the refrigerator so they last better, and then just take 2 or 3 out every day. If you just get 2 brands and mix them, you've got a 25% chance you're taking nothing. The best probiotic is asking the pharmacist what he has in the refrigerator. If he or she obtains and has something in the refrigerator, then that's usually more alive. And I think one was called VSL3, but I think that went to a different company. I don't know the details. I've read that obtaining them on the internet is better because they're fresher. So then when they arrive, put them in the refrigerator. Now, something that I call a nutrient is very low dose lithium. 150 milligrams a day is the smallest pill, and I've had 62 people in the last 3 or 4 years who came out of depression in 2 weeks on it. You can obtain it on the internet up to, I think, 120 milligrams, which is about the same thing. And it's called lithium orotate. And very small doses of it, 5 milligrams or even 1 milligram, helps prevent Alzheimer's. There's at least 4 studies on that. Taking more thyroid, like Cytomel, that helps. And there's one thing I've never used, is curcumin. And in one study, 1,000 milligrams helped atypical depression. People that oversleep and have some rejection sensitivity in their depression. But it didn't help the regular depression. But 1,000 milligrams seems to me a very low dose because it's really basically a food. And possibly if they use 2 grams or 4 grams, they'd get a much better response. I'm going to have to try using that. And also vitamins A, C, and E theoretically might help depression because they're antioxidants like NAC, but NAC is 100 times better. Anyway, those are things I left out. Thank you very much.